was camping in Northeast Ohio by myself on my third and final night. I woke up to take a leak, walked about 10 feet from my hammock, and noticed a headlamp about 100 feet away. I watched it for about 10 minutes. I watched him stand up, sit down. I got my boots on, grabbed my hatchet, and started walking to the right of my campsite. I was going to find out what he was up to. I got about 50 yards from my site and started walking toward him when I noticed another headlamp about 40 feet from me, moving around. I hit the ground and threw some leaves over me. He walked about 10 feet from where I was laying. Then he stopped, lit a cigarette, and finished his beer. He threw his can on the ground like he owned the place. After he got far enough that he couldn't hear me, I got up and started walking toward the first guy. I got close enough to him that I could hear his phone receiving messages. I moved up closer to him quietly until I could see his face lit up from his cell phone. That's when he stood up and started walking toward my hammock. I laid on the ground for a minute, letting the anger build up, then made my way toward my site. I stopped when I heard my tarp above my hammock being torn apart. Then I saw flashlights flicker and my big flashlight turning on and off. I heard my mess kit being tossed around as they talked about how he was just here. These guys weren't just trespassers. They were deliberately screwing with me. I lay there, seething, as I watched them destroy my camp. My flashlight eventually dimmed as they walked away, leaving my camp in ruins. When the sun came up and I returned, my whole site was trashed. My hammock and tarp were shredded by what looked like a machete. My mess kit was stomped on. They took my backpack, rain gear, and flashlight. I went to the spot where I saw the first guy and found chew pouches, 8 empty beer cans, and an empty lighter. I walked to where I saw the other guy and found an empty bag of powder, meth, along with cigarette butts and a pile of shit, with no toilet paper in sight. These weren't just some random guys. They were meth heads, probably thinking they could do whatever they wanted out here in the woods. They didn't care about the land, about the peace and solitude that people like me come out here for. They just wanted to wreck something, to destroy someone else's peace, because they've already destroyed their own lives. When I was younger, around 14 or 15 years old, my family used to camp at a state park. Every night, my friend and I would venture into the woods for what we called the ritual. It was our thing, pushing the boundaries a little more each time, seeing how far we could go without getting lost. We'd bring flashlights, but we liked the challenge of navigating in the dark, relying on the faint moonlight and our memory of the paths. One night, we decided to push our limits even further, heading deeper into the woods than we ever had before. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite, walking quietly through the underbrush, when we heard something, a soft whispering coming from behind us. We froze, adrenaline spiking. We quickly hit the flashlights and spun around, but there was nothing there, just the trees and the darkness. After a few uneasy glances at each other, we shrugged it off and kept moving. But then we heard it again. This time it was closer, the whispers more distinct. We stopped dead in our tracks, our hearts pounding in our chests. We scanned the area with our flashlights, straining to see through the dense undergrowth. The air felt thick, like something was out there watching us. We debated whether to keep going or head back. That's when we saw her. She was crawling on the ground, whispering disjointed, random words. Her clothes were dark and caked with dirt, blending into the forest floor. Her hair hung in tangled clumps over her face. For a moment, it felt like something out of a horror movie, like she wasn't even real. But then she noticed us noticing her. She stood up abruptly, swaying a bit on her feet, and declared that she was looking for her campsite. The whole situation felt off. Here we were, 2 kids alone in the woods at night, and now we had this strange woman claiming to be lost. Something didn't sit right with me, but we couldn't just leave her there. She was clearly disoriented, possibly in trouble. So against every instinct that screamed at us to get out of there, we offered to help her find her way back to the campground. As we walked her back, she stumbled and mumbled incoherently. It became clear that she was either drunk, high, or both. She was barely coherent, and the more she talked, the less sense she made. We asked her which campsite she was at, but her answers were all over the place. When we finally reached the campground, we started asking around, trying to figure out where she belonged. Eventually, we found her group, or rather, they found us, laughing and drinking like nothing was wrong. They didn't even realize she was missing, and when we told them what had happened, they just laughed it off. One of them even joked about how she always gets lost when she's had too much fun. As we walked back to our own campsite, the whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. Here was a woman who could have been in serious danger, and her so-called friends didn't even care enough to notice she was gone. If we hadn't gone that far into the woods, who knows how long she would have been out there, alone and vulnerable. And the fact that she was so out of it, wandering around in the dark, made me realize how easily something could have gone horribly wrong.